Hi, Jen. Thanks so much for coming.
Thanks, Koichi.
So this is a fireside chat between us and Jenn Weidman from Space Bangkok. The title is Resilience, Creativity, and Innovation, the Common Link. So I think we can start off pretty simply. Jenn, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how just a little bit about yourself so we can understand who we're talking with today?
Sure. So my educational background is in cultural and applied anthropology. My working background is in peace building and conflict resolution. And I am founder and CEO of Space Bangkok, which is a social enterprise based here in Bangkok. We are 5.5 years old officially now. We do peace building, process facilitation, resilience, and other stuff.
Cool. And how did you get on this journey? How did you come up to start, Space Bangkok 5.5 years ago?
So I used to work in the field of peace building and conflict resolution, and I facilitated an international program there in that field. And I learned from all the people who were coming, who were people, mid to upper level career, already in the field, working really well. I learned from them a lot about one of their most common challenges, which was actually resilience. And a lot of the work I did was accompaniment of them along their journey through developing what they were going to do next, looking for their next steps, developing their careers, themselves as people. And so walking with them through this journey of resilience was something that I did a lot of. At the same time, I also had my own journey with resilience as well. I have my own situations and things happening to me. And it just kind of sparked this, need to shift and say, look, let's look at this more carefully. What is this resilience thing about? How can we expect people that we trust to save the world, but we don't support them in other ways? The incidences and the statistics on mental health and things like that are quite high and quite disturbing. They're not working at their best. And these are the people that we're hoping will save the world for us and for everyone else. And that's not right. How can we help part of humanity without harming other parts of humanity? How can we all work together and do our work regardless of what it is, with more resilience, more creativity, and more innovation?
I see, thanks. Because I know on your website, or at least from what I've read from your profile in Space Bangkok, it says a social venture that helps those addressing the biggest problems do that work, right? So, I mean, since you mentioned it, and since it is part of the talk that we're having, what does resilience mean to you and to Space Bangkok? If you can, just describe it.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people describe resilience as bouncing back. So something terrible happens, or you're going through burnout, or something happens in your life, and you're gonna bounce back. For me, I like to describe it differently, because bouncing back to me means that you're going back to the way you were before that incident thing happened to you. And in my own experience, you can't. Something happens to you, you go through burnout. There's a tragical event that happens. There's whatever it is, you're struggling. You can never return to who you were before. So instead of bouncing back, to me, it's more about moving forward. You can use bounce if you want, but it's about pushing forward and moving forward. We're all going to fall into pits and holes in our lives. That's the nature of people and humans. The question is, do you stay there? Do you move forward? Can you climb out of the hole? And how do you do that? How well do you do that? How, let's say, with the most constructive way can you do that? And so resilience for me is it's a muscle that you build and you train, so that when you do fall into that hole, it doesn't prevent you from falling into holes, by the way, but when you do, you are equipped with tools to help yourself to get out from that better.
Okay, so based on what you're saying, do you think someone who is more resilient than other people would not necessarily be someone who doesn't fall down as often, but is someone who knows how to move forward?
Yes.
And do you think that comes with practice?
Yes. Yeah. Resilience, it's built, it's learned, it's made. You work on it, you train it, just like you train your body for sports. You train your skills and other things. resilience is a skill that you also can train, and it's something you can build for yourself.
And do you think some people are better at that than other people, at building these things? Because I feel like sometimes, I don't know, I think in terms of how people deal with loss or how people deal with terrible things happening to them, some people are, I guess, more robotic. Some are more, emotional. Some take it a lot harder than others. So do you think that plays a role in like how long it takes for them to get back to where they were or get back to move forward?
It looks different on everybody, right? And I think in that way, comparing, let's say, time that it takes people to recover or to move forward is a bit unfair, because we all have a process and it will be different for everyone. It's not a linear thing. It's not even circular. It's more sort of scribbled. In that way, you may return and go back and go again. At the same time, we have different skill levels in resilience. And we build it from when we're children. And as adults, we also can continue to build it. And we have different skill levels. So we may be more or less equipped than each other to deal with whatever that thing is. And that can translate into time. It can also translate into other things, quality, and how things are moving and things like that. I would also say we also deal with things differently. So it looks different, right? Some of us are more internal, some of us more external. And so, who knows how it will look on each of us.
That's actually, that's a good point. So I actually use the word robotic. I know I wasn't trying to use that word, but do you think that's any indication on how resilient a person is, like externally how they seem? Or is that like a sign of something that doesn't really tell you anything at all about how resilient that person is?
I don't think, I think it's hard to tell by the external, because if you talking to someone and they've just suffered a loss, for example, or something's happened, and you experience them as robotic, as you said, you don't know what's going on inside. So resilience doesn't mean you don't feel things. You feel everything. You fall down, and it's hard and it's painful, but you feel it and you keep going forward. It's different than saying, I'm just not going to recognize that. I'm going to be in denial. I'm not going to admit that this has happened. I'm not going to face it. I'm not going to feel it. That's not resilience. That's disassociation, which is not the same thing. So you don't know, but externally, you don't know what, from the external viewpoint, you don't know what's going on inside of a person.
Okay, I think that's a pretty fair statement. In terms of the other two words in the title of our talk, though, we have creativity and innovation. I know you mentioned helping those who do the best work do that work. And how do you think that plays in? Because I know creativity and innovation is something people hear about a lot. You say creativity is a part of innovation, how innovation is like such a big thing now, but how does resilience come into that?
So one of the ways I like to describe resilience is looking after, maintaining that spark of fire that we all have inside of us. So as human beings, we all have one. Some people call it soul or passion or belief or life or whatever. People call it spirit. People call it different things. But we all have inside of us this sort of fire. And I do sort of this motion because it sits right here, in your chest somewhere. You have that feeling. When things happen to you or bad things happen, you're struggling, you're tired, you're burnout, there's grief, there's loss, that fire goes away. And it gets really small and it shrinks. Sometimes it completely dies. And if anyone's ever had that experience, you're alive, but inside you're feeling quite dead. What do you do? Where do you find that spark? Because that spark is where your creativity lives. That's where your creativity comes from. And that's then where you go to innovation. So if you walk into a normal office, and we're talking about individuals, but it's also teams. So you walk into an office and you say, hey, everybody, let's go. We're going to do something new. Let's think of a new way to do this. Come on. The response is usually something like, people just sigh because they're tired. We're tired, just all very tired. And when you're tired, that flame, that spark is low. You just don't have the creative energy to push to the next level, to think of something new, to innovate in the true sense of the word. Therefore, back it up, resilience helps us do that. So it's not only for when we fall into holes, but it's also to maintain that spark so we can do our work long-term. We can be creative long-term. We can think about new things in new ways long-term, both as individuals and as teams. So it's sort of the beginning of how this whole thing fits together.
Okay. And it's interesting you mentioned like when you go into the office and you try to get people to do something, sometimes that they don't meet you with the level of enthusiasm you're hoping for, right? But I think it's a bit of a cliche thing to ask in this kind of situation that we're in. But since we aren't necessarily in the office right now, I know you're in your office, but I'm working from home, right? But how do you think that comes into play? Like, what happens when people end up having to work from home and not going to the office? What happens to their resilience, or what happens to their ability to be creative or be innovative?
Mm. Yes, I'm in my office because it's my day to be in the office. So yes, for sure. I did a training on facilitation recently, and this may highlight it. And one of the things that the group wanted to learn about and to talk about was keeping the energy in a room when you do facilitation, and how do you do that? And from some of the comments that they were saying, it's like, oh, the energy's down in the room. How do I get it up, and things like that. And so I asked them in the session, I said, where do you find your energy? That's question. And they all wrote on the board that we were using, which was virtual. They all wrote from other people in the room, from engaged respondents, from people who are engaged in the workshop. And I said, isn't it interesting that I asked you where you find your energy, and you all wrote about something in that space at that time, which is arguably more difficult in a virtual space than in an in-person space. I think most people would say that. Nobody wrote about where they find their energy before they got to the event. Nobody wrote about in their personal life, how do they recharge their batteries? Nobody wrote about that. They weren't thinking about that at all. And we talked about, if you want to keep energy in a facilitation, you need to start with a full battery. You can't start thinking, oh, the participants will give me energy and then I'll be fine. You have to fill up, you have to charge before you get there, and then you go. Which I think when we're talking about virtual, we're talking about not meeting each other. There's a draining part of that as well. We all know about Zoom fatigue. It's real. Come on. We don't meet each other. We don't have some of those side conversations. We don't laugh about things. We don't go out and get food. All of those things that kind of help us to relax and help us to have energy and have a nice workflow in the workspace, they're not there. And in that way, it's tiring and it's challenging to both form team and also as yourself to figure out how you're going to keep that impetus going to do cool things, coming up. You have to find it yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly feel like, it's a lot harder for me to work when I'm home by myself, trying to communicate with people through Zoom and WhatsApp and all that stuff. There are apps out there trying to help this, I think, but it's not quite the same. Maybe it's the food, I guess. I don't know, like eating alone and eating with other people.
I mean, there's another part of that too, right? Which is we can do better at recreating some of that space in the virtual space. We can do better around small talk. We can do better around eating together virtually. We can do better around how we talk to each other, what we say, how we feed in and out and encourage that kind of exchange. A lot of times the reaction is sort of, oh, we're online, we have to use everybody's time completely just for this thing. And so nobody talks except for, one at a time. And, half the time people have their cameras off. We don't even see their face. And we forget, or we decide it's superfluous, this extra stuff. But actually the extra stuff is really what we need. And it should be at the heart of things. And we should put the time in, and we should take the time to pay attention to those things as well.
Yeah, I think having those extra things definitely make a difference for sure.
Because they're not extra. It turns out they were the foundation of everything that we do. We just never recognized it.
Okay, just taking a step back to when you mentioned the spark, the soul, for like someone to like nurture that. And that's like a big part of being resilient. It seems to me a little bit abstract. So I want to ask if it's the same as motivation. Is it? So when I think about this, like when you're trying to rekindle the spark, is it not the same as trying to, I guess, preserve your ability to do more work? Like as someone who's like tired from all the things I have to do and they feel a bit burnt out, and then you say you have to, keep up your ability to keep working. To me, it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, in that sense, because you did mention that you don't want someone to just bounce back to where they were, because that's where they ended up. That's how they ended up being so burnt out in the beginning. So how do you think that, like, how would you say that, I guess, how does keeping your spark alive help in that sense, if it's not just to do more work? Or is it more like, just to keep your spirits up, and it's a whole other thing to just your ability to do work?
There's several parts to that question, right? One is, what are we alive for? Because are you really alive without that spark? Right? What is life living? What is living life? So there's that part. So I'll just tell it this way, and then it might be more clear. When I went through burnout, I've been through burnout. Please don't go there if you haven't been there yet. To whoever's out there, I do not recommend. If you go through burnout, you lose energy. Motivation is one part, but I would describe it a bit more as energy and creative energy, not necessarily the energy to go back and plug away, but the energy to think of new things, the energy to think of, to do big things, the energy to do hard things, the energy to do the things in your life, whether it's work or not, that you really want to do. Or in some ways, the energy to do anything at all, even to get up in the morning sometimes. And so I think in that way, it's not a recharge so you can go back to the grind, but it's a recharge so that you can keep living, and living in the holistic way as a person with quality of life, with creative ideas, who's doing work and also doing other things, and can put themselves and their whole self into that. Not to the point of burnout. We shouldn't be taking rests when we're already on empty. You don't wait till your car runs out of gas to refill it, right? Like you refill it before you get to that part. We should be doing that with ourselves too. We should be maintaining this as well. But it's not about, oh, burnout, are you? Here, have some energy. You can go back to all that, the habits you had before that brought you here. It shouldn't be about that.
And then in that case, how do you know you're at that stage where you need to make a change quickly before you get to, the point where you'd have to do a lot more to get back to a stage in your life where you can, say that you're enjoying the work you do, or that you have the energy to do something big? How do you tell that you're heading down towards that path?
Yeah, I think there are some different signs. And when I was in burnout myself, I did what everybody did, right? I Googled it. How do I know I'm in burnout? How do I know I'm burnt out? That kind of thing. At the time, this was quite some years ago, and at the time, the resource out there available was much less. And so it wasn't actually very helpful. I think there's more out there now, that a lot of, they'll talk about malaise, you're tired, you're not motivated, all those things. But there were things that weren't mentioned, such as, it took me all day to write a 2-sentence email. And I guess what I'm describing, some people call it sort of the hardest thing, and it's usually very small. It's a very simple thing, but it seems like it's not possible to do it. And you'd sit there all day in front of your computer, like, I need to write this email, but I can't, and it just seems impossible. And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, God, I have to do it. And you do it in 30 seconds because that's all it really takes. And then the next day you have the same struggle with yourself over something else. It can show up as, I wouldn't say procrastination, because procrastination has its own uses, but when you need to think of something new, you need to have new ideas, you need to do something big, you need to create something, you just can't. And when I say can't, I mean can't. It's not that you're too lazy, it's not that you just need to get doing it, you can't do it. So there's things like that. If you're feeling, I think there's before you get to that stage, there's other points, right? And some of these are similar to other mental health issues as well. So if you think about feeling less joy and excitement in your life, everything's kind of flat, you're sort of bleh, those, you go through languishing, your answer to things is meh, that kind of thing. It's a bit of warning signal that maybe you need to look at the balance in your life, because something seems to be out of balance. You're not quite running it potentially in the way you should. And there's little signals and there's big signals along the way.
Okay. And do you think that comes in more at certain like different stages of your career? Because I feel like people who just started working will try to do a lot more than they might have to compared to people who already found the balance, right? Or do you think it's more like someone who's been working at the same place for a while and then they start feeling it more? Is it like early state, like late, or like, or it depends?
I think it could happen at any time because it's a combination, right? So if you let's say you get to burnout, that is a joint collaboration between you and your place of employment. So the only way you're really going to fix that is together also, so that, which is a complicating factor, but that's why we work with teams and organizations as well, and not just individuals, right? But when it happens, I think depends. There's a lot about boundaries. There's a lot about support. There's a lot about the kind of work you're doing, how much work is part of it as well, but also how you running your life. How are you living your life? How are you dealing with things? Who's around you? What is the interaction at work? So it could be sparked by a change. It could be sparked by steady weight increasing over time. It could be sparked by a sprint that can't last forever. It could be sparked by a lot of different things. So I think it can hit and it can happen at different times. Mm-hmm.
It's very scary.
It's very scary.
It's very scary. But okay, then let me ask you about it from another angle. Instead of the different stages of your career, how about the type of your career? So I'll give you an example. Startup entrepreneurs, startup founders are known to be, really hardworking. You're expected to work all the time. CEOs for like, especially early stage startups, you're meant to do everything, right? Like people expect you to do all these other roles and bootstrap your way, in the beginning, before you even have people coming in to help you. So do you think that's like really, really prominent for the kind of people who want to do their own business to feel this? Or do you think it's kind of like more for certain types of careers than others? Or is it like people who go into those careers have the aptitude to deal with it? Do you think?
So I think burnout can happen to anyone across the board. I think there are some industries that are set up in such a way that it's more likely. The peace and conflict resolution, development, humanitarian, such and such industry that my background is in is definitely one of those. The entrepreneurial space is of course one of those. And I think the level of burnout amongst founders and CEOs is extremely high. And yeah, for all those reasons you said, because you're starting it up, you're bootstrapping it. I've had this experience, right? You hustle, you have to do everything. And the only thing people are saying is, well, have you done this yet? And you should do that. And did you go to this place? And did you do this thing? And it's all about the stuff you haven't done. And there's just never enough time in a day, and your to-do list never ends. And there you are. For me, when I started Space, I thought, I can't work in the resilience space of things and then be that person who's the founder, CEO burning themselves out, because there's no integrity there. If I'm going to work on this with other people, I have to work on it with me as well. Therefore, I need to find a way to mindfully start a mindful startup. And I'll say it's a struggle, right? Because the startup culture is real, and there's reason that it's that. You do have to get a lot of things going, and it is all on you. And there's a lot of things to juggle in that space. So I think it's definitely a big issue for entrepreneurs. Do I think people who go into the different industries that are, let's say, set up to have you fail in this area are more prepared? No, not necessarily.
And okay, following up on that, does that mean it's unavoidable then, essentially?
No, not unavoidable.
Not unavoidable.
We have to be aware, we have to do it with intention. And we have to be shifting our values about what we think is things we should be doing and what we think is good and what we celebrate and what we don't. People talk about, I'm going to give my 100%. That doesn't mean till you fall over and you have to check yourself into the hospital. That's not what that means. It means you're 100% while you're still healthy. And the understanding and the shifting of, I can survive on ramen noodles and sleep when I'm dead, but actually you do your best work when you get enough sleep and you're healthy and you're eating healthy and you're moving your body regularly and these things. That's when you do your best work. If you want to give your best to the effort that you're doing, if you want to be the most efficient and effective you can be, looking after yourself is the best thing you can do. That's not what we're taught. That's not in the greater society of startups and entrepreneurs these days, but it is true. So we have to flip it on its head and be radical in that way.
And then linking that back to creativity and innovation. So I guess that would mean to be creative, to be innovative, you need to be in that mindset, to be at that stage that you're not so tired that you're just kind of like dragging by, and that you kind of like have enough energy to do all these things. But I think, I know you mentioned this thing to me when we talked earlier about not in this call necessarily, but from before, about this artist who, you know, creative people, like this documentary that I went and checked out. And it's kind of interesting. Can you tell me like what you think about that? Because it's kind of like the context is people are really creative and they need to be continually creative all the time. They have their own weird hobbies, I guess is how I'd say it. Like they have their own way of resting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think that's like a necessary thing? Like everybody needs a hobby to be creative, to be, you know, operating at like at the right level?
I do. I think everybody needs something. And whether it's a pastime, a hobby, something you do, I think we have different associations with different words, but yeah, the documentary series you're talking about is abstract.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And it focuses on some of the most sort of the big creatives, as you would say, in the world, the people who design the world we live in, basically. And you think about these people, they have to be creative, as you said, all the time. How do you maintain that where you're always thinking about new things that are, you know, mind-blowing? How do you do that? And one of the things that I think is very interesting, as you said, across all of them, is they all have something, whether it's a hobby, a pastime, an activity, something they do in their quote rest time, right? But it's not, and this is where I think, you know, we think about rest as not work. We think about it as wasted time. We think about it as, I can't spare that because I have to do some work. But what we don't recognize is that's actually where all the work starts in our brains. And then it comes out when we go to work. So it's actually, you know, that idea of aimless time is actually valuable. And it's the spark of creativity happens in that rest or aimless time or those things. So some people, you know, some people are painting, some people are surfing, some people are walking, some people are walking their dog or playing with their kids or whatever it is, cooking, or, you know, who knows, but everybody has something in their life that they pursue that's not about work. And it's one of those ways that we get constant inputs of new things in our brains, help us think about different things and in different directions. And then the other challenge with that is, and I've had this myself as well, is the pressure to monetize everything, which is a very capitalist idea, that if you have a hobby, you should also put that on YouTube, or you should be making videos, you should be selling it on Facebook, or you can, you know, you should be somehow monetizing your hobby. But what if we pursued something just because we like it, because it's good for us, because it gives us energy, because it helps us be creative, because it helps us live a great and full life, and we enjoy it. We don't have to monetize, we don't have to sell. There's no pressure. It's just us doing it because. And when we do that, and we have things like that are regular features in our life, how that impacts the work we do and the ideas we can come up with, the energy we have for it, how we can move forward. It's significant.
It's significant. Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting you mentioned like the need to, or like people thinking you should always try to monetize, always try to, you know, if you have a hobby, you can probably put it on YouTube. But I feel like that, not that it defeats the purpose of the hobby, but it also makes it into something else.
Yeah.
It no longer becomes something that you can like rest at, something you can just do just to enjoy. It becomes a second job.
Exactly.
Right. And then you just end up being more tired at the end of the day.
Not everything has to be a hustle. There has to be a non-hustle in your life, whatever that is, and whatever that looks like.
I do have a question though. So actually we have a question from Facebook, but let me ask this before we go to that question. In terms of hobbies, I know for myself and from a group of friends, there is this thing of content consumption, right? We just sit back and watch Netflix. We just listen to music. We just, you know, we're not sketching, we're not playing instruments as a hobby. Is there like a level of, I guess, like, is it enough to just sit and watch Netflix as a hobby? Or do you think that's like you should try to do something else?
I like to think of all of this as a spectrum. So if you think about self-care on one end of the spectrum, which is a word that is very well known these days, and it's sort of, oh, I had a really bad day, I need to go shopping or grab a drink with friends or get a manicure, whatever you are, whatever you do, whatever, that's that side. And that's sort of if I can use a medical analogy, that's the first aid, the Band-Aid, the plaster, the first aid room where you just sort of, okay, bandage that up, it'll be better tomorrow, we're fine. Just need to do something. I need to watch my favorite show or whatever. The other side of that spectrum is resilience practice. And this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about that you have in your life regularly that helps you to work on this muscle of resilience. The trick is the activities are the things that you might do along the spectrum, and the activities or things that I might do along the spectrum are not the same. Right. So it's hard for me to say, where's Netflix watching on the spectrum? Because for you and for me, it might be in a different place. For somebody else, it might not even be on the spectrum. Somebody says, when I feel really bad, I had a bad day, I have to go for a run. Somebody else says running is part of my resilience practice. So it's different there. Netflix watching is something I do for sure. And for me, it's about, in some ways, freeing my mind to go to places that my body is not, sparking my imagination, imagining what if, learning from other people, learning from other examples, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. And there's a thought process that goes with that. Sometimes it's just like, I just want to watch something in front of me and space out. There's no thought process with that, right? So if I was going to separate these two ways of watching Netflix that I do, I would say the lack of thought process one is a self-care. I just want to zone out and forget that the world exists, right? The other one where there's a thought process behind it and I'm more intentionally, mindfully watching, I'm not double screening, I'm just focused on this thing, I'm losing myself in that and I'm learning from it. That's something else. So that may be somewhere else on this spectrum. At the same time, so I guess in that way, it means I'm active when I'm doing that. There's an active part of me that's engaging as opposed to the passive is just passive. So in that way, I would say something active is useful as a non-hustle hobby pastime thing you do, whether it's playing music, it doesn't matter if you're good or bad, or, none of this stuff matters if it doesn't, whether you're good at it or you're bad at it, who cares? It's not the point. The point is you're doing it and you enjoy it and it works for you. So having something that you can actively do, I think is also important.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back. There's a question that came in from Facebook and it's about burnout. We talked about that like a little bit earlier. The question is, how can we best show support to those who may be going through burnout? Your friends, your family, someone you know, how can we help them?
The word accompaniment comes to mind because I think what we want to do as humans, mostly we want to find solutions. We want to fix people, which doesn't work because nobody can fix people. We can only try to fix ourselves, and fix really isn't the right word either, right? It's develop and grow. So the word accompaniment comes to mind. When I was in burnout, some people would say things like, well, you just need to go and work out and then you'll have more energy. And it's not that I disagreed with them. Agreed with them, but I couldn't do it. And it's difficult to describe the feeling of you just can't, like you literally can't get up off the chair that you're sitting on or the couch or whatever it is to go do it. And I couldn't say anything to them, but yeah, it's not helpful because then it would just make me feel guilty for not doing it. And then you just rag on yourself like, why can't I do that, right? So there's an accompaniment space. And while I was in burnout and coming out, there's some of my friends around me were also experiencing similar things that happened. And so we accompanied each other in some ways. And sometimes that was just, can I come over and we just eat pizza and pickles, literally, and just sit. We might talk, we might not talk, but we're there. Sometimes it was if somebody had a little bit of some energy they were working on, sort of, let's go do this, and sort of do it together and just recognize that they won't be able to do all of the solutions because it's a gradual thing to build. So accompaniment, having the chat, listening, learning, hearing where they're at, and then just being there with them along that way. and having them tell you what they need and helping them in support in that way, in any way you can, because it's, burnout's the kind of thing a lot of people don't talk about.
It's true.
So having someone listen and just describe what it's like and be there can be really helpful. And then if you can identify, it would really help me if you could just call me, or really help me if you could pick me up to do this thing. And then just doing that. Sometimes it's small things.
It's interesting you mentioned how trying to fix a person or that person might not be the most helpful kind of way to do it, because I do feel like there's this what's the word, like, I guess, like the view of being burnt out, or the view of someone who is in burnt out, of they just need to pick themselves back up and just do it, and just do this thing, and then they'll be fine, that kind of thing, which I think you put it quite well, is it doesn't always work like that. Usually doesn't really, actually does, you just end up kind of saying yeah sure just to not disappoint them, and it ends up being worse.
Yep. So. Exactly. And that's the same for burnout, depression, grief, any of those things. If you've lost someone close to you, and people are like, oh, come on, let's just go have fun. And you can't, you just trying to crawl out of that hole. In that way, it's a similar experience.
Okay. And sorry, there's another question. It's about meditation. So the question goes, have you had some experience or insights on impact of meditation on resilience? If so, can you please share some of them? So sure. Meditation on resilience?
Yeah. Yep. So mindfulness is one of those things that I think is really important as part of resilience, and having those pauses, those moments of reflection as well. So I think meditation is one tool that a lot of people use as part of their resilience practice, fully behind it. If you are the person who says, I try, but I sit there and I just can't do it. My monkey brain will not, it's running around in my brain. I struggle. That's fine. There are many different ways that we can do meditation, and there are lots of different schools of meditation. There's also, as aside from sitting meditation, there's walking meditation, there's eating meditation. Chocolate meditation is always a good one if you're a chocolate fan. You can do meditation in lots of different ways. For some people, washing the dishes turns into moments of meditation, or sweeping the floor turns into moments of meditation as well. I think meditation as one of the parts, just to reiterate, of resilience practice is great. What that looks like will depend on you, and because not everybody meditates in the same way, and it doesn't work in the same way for everyone. And again, that idea of reflection and mindfulness, and having moments in your day where you slow down, where you stop, and where you just reflect on things. I think about a couple of different components of resilience practice and how we interact with these things. And again, everybody's different, right? But one of them is reflection, and meditation is a really good way to get into that. There's others, creativity, nature, creativity meaning doing creative things, nature, movement, and connection and community are others. I mean, none of us can do this alone either. So I cheer you on. If you're meditating, go for it.
Okay, thank you. And there's another question. It seems like you have been answering it kind of throughout, but not in a concise way, like in a Q&A kind of way. So the question goes, did you discover any key steps or recommendations for getting out of burnout?
Yeah, totally. So when I Googled, what is burnout? Am I burnout? How do I get out of this? The answer was leave your job. And I thought, okay, that's not really an option for me right now. I have responsibilities in my life. Can there not be another way? Are you telling me that's my only option? I don't accept that. And so I tried to find, how can I do this? How can I get that spark back? How can I build a stack of wood and spark that flame, and then look after it and build it so it's bigger? And so I tried to do some different things. Some things are easier than others. So one, there was a moment of time where I just couldn't, I'd come home and I'd sit on the couch and I couldn't get off the couch. That was it. And so I started but I would watch things, but I would double screen. So I started to stop double screening. pull the focus into whatever I was watching. Like, okay. And then I started to watch things that were inspirational, where somebody had to overcome something. So it ends up being a lot of sports movies, just so you know, because that's often what it, yeah. But I wouldn't watch anything that didn't have any kind of redemption, right? That wasn't hopeful in that way. And if it was fiction or not, I would just look at the characters and think, where did they find that energy? How did they do that? Maybe some can seep into me. I would read things that were about that as well. Then I would slowly try to, you try to force yourself to do some things. Start small is the other lesson. And you can only force yourself to do so many things in a day or a week, right? So baby steps is the only way to get out. So gradually, you started to build, you started to feel something. It's like, oh, I felt something. Oh, okay, what do I do with that? And how do I keep that going? Maybe I'll do something. Okay, maybe I'll do something small. Maybe I'll do something else that's small. And then looking at these areas that I mentioned, how can you engage with these things? Maybe you can't get off the couch like me. Maybe you can get off the couch. You want to get in your car and go somewhere. Go sit in a forest and breathe. How can you slow down and have those moments? How can you start to deal with what's going on inside of you is the other part. Because you can't run from it. You have to embrace it, deal with it, and keep going. I don't know if that's helpful. The other thing I will say is I'm one person. Other people will probably have other steps. And one of the challenges is that we have to find what works for us. I know some people who, maybe somebody came alongside them and accompanied them and said, I'm going to be at your house every, other day at this time. And I hope we're going to go for a walk together. If we can't go for a walk together, I'll sit next to you on the couch, or whatever it is. And that, where that's there. I know from some friends, a friend of mine, he came back home from an assignment in a conflict zone. And he would just sleep, and then he'd get up for breakfast, and then he'd go back to bed all day. And his wife was actually the one, she didn't talk to him about it. She just did it. So she just gradually, after a while, he would get up to go to breakfast or to go to the bathroom, and she would make the bed. And then he'd come back to go to bed, and he'd be like, oh, well, she made it. And I can't get in there now. So I guess I'll sit on the couch. And so she did that for like a week or two, and then he would just sit on the couch. And then she would say, well, since you're up, why don't you walk our daughter to school? And then he'd be like, okay. And so he started to walk his daughter to school. And then it would be, well, since you're at school, why don't you stop at the market on the way home? And I'd be like, okay. And then so gradually, she just, without declaring any intention to him, she just kind of made those little baby steps for him and prompted him to do that. And he said after, when he had sort of recovered, and he thought, I would still be sleeping all day if it wasn't for her. But she helped me in that way. So when I say accompaniment, it can even be those small things. Like she helped him by making the bed. So he had to move, these sorts of things.
Thank you. That's a really like a sweet story. It also paints quite a nice image of going a little bit at a time, but still going forward. And since you mentioned the first thing that you found on Google was to quit your job, it's kind of funny, but also at the same time, it links back to what you kind of said before about how these things with resilience, you have to deal with it yourself and also with your team, with your organization that you work with. How does that look in terms of like, if someone wants to do something, if, for example, I run a company and I see that one of my employees are experiencing or going down that route of, being burnt out, what can I do? What can the workplace do?
So when I said it's a collaborative effort, it is, because there's individuals, what we're doing ourselves, how we're living our lives. Do we have non-hustle pastimes? Are we setting personal boundaries? Are we sticking to them? And then it's the team or the office, right? Are we respecting boundaries? Are we giving proper support? Are we giving encouragement and space? Are we a blame and shame culture? Are we you must reply to me within a minute of every time I message you, regardless of the time of day or night culture or not? Do we value humans as the source of everything that happens or not? Or do we see our team as robots? So in that way, if you notice, you're thinking, okay, somebody on my team seems to be struggling a little bit, right? There's conversation that can be had there as well.
Mm.
And to sort of unpack, where's that coming from? How can we work as a team better? How can we manage better in a way that creates space for people to look after their own resilience? Are there permissions that need to be given? Do people need to understand some different things? Do we need to adjust how we're doing things? And or that individual in their own lives, what do they need to be thinking about and adjusting as well? And this doesn't mean that, oh, you cracked the resilience code and it's yay, happy all the time. There's still ups and downs as life, right? And we have to deal with that. At the same time, we can still keep that within, let's say, a range, sort of the okay range as we go along. And we don't have to be peaking and falling into deep holes and going into the extremes in any way. So I would say first, conversation is one, and then also do a critical look at how your team works, how you're managing, and what the practices of your company are. Not critical in the way of, well, these other people don't have a problem, so what's your problem? Not that. But in the way of, looking at boundaries, looking at personal and professional, looking at how we're interacting all together, and looking for, are there ways where we're not actually valuing people? Are there ways where we're not actually creating that space or allowing people to do the things they need to do in order to look after themselves as well?
Okay, and actually, while you were talking, I kind of thought of something. I feel like there are certain, I guess, industries that are very competitive, especially for kind of new entrants like coming into the job market, jobs like consulting and all those, really competitive kind of fields. They seem to have almost the opposite, but they have like, I guess, a mutual agreement between the person going in and the employee. The employee and the employer, kind of mixing it up. But it's kind of, I just want to ask your opinion if you think this is like true, if you think it makes any sense that they're doing this. It's something my friend told me is a lot of people who go into, for example, consulting. I don't want to talk bad things about consulting specifically because a lot of my friends are consultants and they love their job. But I'm just raising it as an example because my friend who mentioned it was doing that at the time. And he said, a lot of people who just started, analysts or consultants, they have this understanding that they're expected to work, really late hours, work all the time, work a lot. I mean, they're compensated for it, but they don't plan to stay very long. They know that after they leave this like firm, the next job they'll do will be less of a load, but because they had those kind of like time before working really hard at this place, it will make that next move possible for them. And because they understand that, the firm also knows that they don't expect this person to stay for more than 1 to 2 years. Right. So it's like this mutual understanding between the person going in and the person hiring them that we'll work you to death. And we know you leave in a year or two, but at least you'll be able to go through to do all these many other things afterwards. And they go, yes, you're paying us well. And at least we'll be able to do these things after we leave. So do you think that makes any sense at all? I mean, they're both agreeing to it kind of in a way, like in an unspoken, agreement. But what do you think?
From a human side, I think that kind of construct, which I see in many industries, is ridiculous, and we should just stop it. Because I don't think in the long run that it really serves anyone as well as the sales pitch may say it does. Of course, I know people as well, and who, and there's this rhetoric of, well, I'm gonna give up my life for a year so that I can get this thing later. It's kind of like, I'm gonna borrow money so I can go to university or higher education so that I can get this job and train myself to do this thing, and then I'll pay it back. So there's this delayed reward system that we can do as humans. I think though that a lot of that's predicated on the assumption that you have that time. So this idea that I'm going to work, and in this certain phase of my life is when I'm going to work really hard, and so I'll have less time to myself, but it's okay because then later I'll retire and then I'll have my savings or my pension, and then I can do whatever I want. I was not born with a guarantee of retirement, were you? Nobody was born with a guarantee of tomorrow. So And I'm not trying to be morbid here, but it's a reality of we're not guaranteed any of that time. So yet we live our lives often that we're going to delay the living part for this or that working here and there and now. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, one shouldn't make that decision to, work to death for a year and then get something else after and do something else. That's an individual personal decision to make. We should think about it really carefully though, because and just sort of look at the value of so we work to death for a year. What in that year are we giving up? We're assuming we're going to have years after that. How is it impacting our physical, mental health going forward? How does that impact our future going forward after that? So as a construct, I think we should fix this. Because we're not there yet, it's an individual choice. And I understand why people make it, for sure. It's something I think we need to think seriously about though.
Okay, thank you for that. And then going the opposite direction, there is this premise of a 4-day work week. And interestingly, I read this recently, a startup, because they cannot hire like these developers full time, they'll hire them 3 days a week. And the rest of the time, they'll let them do other projects, their own thing, but they'll pay them less, of course, because it's 3 days a week. And how do you feel about that in terms of working 3 days a week, 4 days a week, compared to, because I know people say if you work 4 days a week, you end up being more productive. But is there like a limit to like how productive you can be versus how much time you even have to work?
There could be. There's a lot of research out there, like you said, on the 4-day work week. There's research out there on how many hours a day are we actually productive. It's about 2 to 4, by the way, after which so those of us working like 16, sorry, but people went to offices back in the day when we were in offices and just watched productivity, and monitored, efficiency and effectiveness and productivity and how that goes, which is, I think, lessons for how to manage our days. When do we need breaks? How to use those things? All of this data is out there so that we can use it to build a working life and a life that works. And it's good for us. I think, there's also the idea of the guaranteed, what is it called? Wage. Everybody gets some money so that your modest housing and food is covered. What would you do?
Right.
And the idea being, would we be freer to do other things that are more creative, that are more inventive? Would we be inventing all kinds of things? Would be making massive inroads in technology and approaches? I don't know. That's the argument. And there's some places where they're starting to pilot this as well. In the end, I don't know where the magic formula is, but I think making some experiments in your team and finding that out for you is worthwhile. I think there's also a balance between, okay, you're hiring developers for 3 days a week. What do you expect them to be getting done in that time? Is that enough? Is that okay for your growth plan? As it is it realistic? What does it mean? If you're expecting them to get, I think that's there's that as well. And then looking, and knowing that efficiency and effectiveness comes in short bursts. It doesn't come in marathons. So if you want to run, the infinite game, as it were, you want to keep going on and on, how do you make sure that you are building your own self, your skills, and your team to do that? There's no win. If you're in business, you don't win. There's no sort of, yay, we achieved it. Okay, we're done. It's not. It just keeps going, right? So we have to be in the long game.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned the internal, like within a day, people aren't, productive all the time. There's certain hours. And I remember you kind of like mentioning that it isn't necessarily the same time for everyone either. Right? So does that mean like the 9 to 5 thing, not the best idea for some people?
Yeah. I mean, if we look at all of us, we all function differently. Some of us, basic, right? Some of us are morning people, some of us are night people, some of us prefer to work. I have a colleague who prefers to work at night because that's when the house is quiet, nobody's bothering her. I don't prefer to work at night. I prefer to work in the morning. How do we communicate? How do we, she sends me pings at the nighttime. I ignore them. She knows I will answer them in the morning when I wake up and she's still sleeping. That's okay. And then there's overlap hours where you can meet and talk and be in real time. So that whole thing about the 9 to 5, yeah, I don't know. Now that we have this model of this virtual system, we're going back to the office in some places, but what is that going to look like? Will we be the way we were before the whole pandemic situation? I hope not. I hope there's difference that comes in, this idea of spending hours commuting so you can spend 9 to 5 or 6 or 7 or however what it is for you in the office, and then spend hours commuting back. I hope we've worked on that a little bit. And what does it mean in the virtual space if we're all working virtually to maximize when we're productive? And then also line up with each other. So, are there common hours we all have online together so we can be exchanging back and forth? How do we leave and create space for people to take breaks? And I don't mean like a 5-minute bio break. I mean breaks for the brain where you go up, you make food for, you go work out, you would do something longer breaks so that you can come back and reset that time of productivity. If you've already used that before hours in the day, you can reset it, but you have to know, how to work that out in your day and how to do that. Yeah, I hope we explore a lot of that more now in the sort of going back kind of thing. I hope it's not back again. I hope we sort of take our learnings and move forward.
I mean, once in a lifetime opportunity, hopefully.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it is the opportunity for reset, right? Yeah. Because the world has been shaken forever. We can reset now. How are we going to rewrite what work looks like, what our offices look like, what how we engage, and then also what does that mean for our resilience? How can we make it so that we have ways that people can be more creative and we can actually do those things and have those ideas that we've always wanted to, but we could never quite reach.
Okay, thank you. We are actually approaching the hour, so I'll ask if anybody has any questions. And if not, I am going to kind of ask Jenn to give us some final, I guess, leaving comments on how do we try to be more resilient in our everyday lives and be more creative, have more energy left to do more innovative things with our work that we do. Doesn't seem to be any questions. So Jenn?
It's a really big question, so I'm figuring out which part to, to focus on.
I know that's a bit mean of me to just kind of like ask you to sum everything up nicely.
After I've said that nobody knows, that it just doesn't, it depends on you, right? I think the underlying, or perhaps an underlying point is this: we need to flip on its head what we understand. That taking care of ourselves isn't luxury, it's imperative. That setting our boundaries and doing those things and having a non-hustle pursuit is imperative to everything else you do. That if you want to have successful, growing, creative, innovative enterprise, job, life, whatever, that's at the core. And the minute we'll be tempted, because society will tempt us with the hustle and all the things you haven't done yet, that there's a space for us to be radical and stand and say, it's okay, I'm gonna keep working on this. And I know that everything I would do will be better if I can first make sure that I'm taking care of myself, my team, and we're all okay. Because if everybody's running, in the high levels of their capacity, imagine if everybody can show up to work in more around that range than in the sort of middle to sort of lower that we mostly show up with, to sort of, help. What if people showed up doing their best work more often than not? How can we make that happen? And it means that we have to actually pull ourselves back and shut off some of those voices outside. Those things that are running around, the messages that we're getting from media, from others, all of that. We're seeing competitors and they're like, why are they going so far? I'm never going to catch up. Run your own thing, do your own journey, run your own race. It's not them, it's you. And if you focus on that and you can flip it all on its head, we can go somewhere.
Okay, and that actually leads to, there's one final comment that came in and it says, what you're describing seems to be like applying sustainability to ourselves.
Totally.
Totally.
Yes, exactly. So we live our lives and we run, I mean, there's books about this, right? We live our lives and we run our games like they're finite, like there's a winning, an end where we're like, yay, we won, okay, get done. But that's not life. As far as when you're doing business, when is it over? When you sell, I guess, I don't know, but when's that gonna happen? I mean, it's not, don't you want your company to then continue on and do this stuff, even if you sold? And what about you? What about you as a person? So it's actually a long-term thing. Yes, of course, because it ends because we all die. But aside from that, our work doesn't have to end. So some people's work still goes. What did they do differently? You know, how did they manage that? Because it's long-term. So how do we work on our sustainability? I love how you put that, sustainability of ourselves. That's resilience too. We can keep doing this. We can do the things that are hard and that are new, and we can do it indefinitely. On and on. Inevitably, we can do it indefinitely. Oh dear. Yes.
Okay, thank you for the final closing statement, I guess. It's good to end on the sustainability of ourselves because of the center's name.
Yep.
And what we do. And before we end, actually, I believe you are doing a project called We Can still, right? Like that's going on. So do you want to tell the audience a little bit about that before we end off? Just as an FYI, in case they're interested.
Yes, I would love to. Thank you. So one of the programs we're currently doing is a program called We Can. It's for women entrepreneurs in Thailand. You can be Thai, you can be not Thai, it doesn't matter. It's a peer support and technical support program. It's about 5-6 months long. We have peer support cohorts that come together and help us to celebrate our achievements, work through our challenges in a way that only other entrepreneurs can really understand. We have technical sessions to add knowledge about topics we want to learn about. There's lots of other benefits that come in depending on the cohorts and all these sorts of things. We have an alumni group as well, of course, and links and networks with useful groups, I will say, and opportunities for both networking, but also promotion and selling and those sorts of things. We're currently accepting applications. And currently, big news, we have sponsorship. So it normally costs a bit of money to join this, but we are currently focused on COVID response and helping women entrepreneurs to get past this pandemic situation. So we have some funding that is sponsoring a limited number of seats, and we have some left. So if anybody wants to apply now, you can get in for free. Hooray. Currently we just had a cohort start, so we're filling up the next cohort. As soon as it is full, it will be ready to go. We've already got some applicants in it. So you don't have to wait long, you can just apply now.
Apply now, you might get it for free.
Yeah, that's right.
Good deal. Okay, if there are no more questions from the audience, then I think we can edit here. Thank you so much, Jenn, for coming. I got a lot from it for sure. I always enjoy talking to you about all these things. You always know, how to describe the things I don't really quite know how to put into words. So it's always beneficial. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Koichi. Thanks for asking great questions, and for everybody who sent their questions. Thanks as well.